On the 19th of January 2009, Eddie Howe was appointed as the permanent manager of Bournemouth, with the side bottom of the league in 17 points from safety. 6 years later, and he'd just gotten them promoted to the Premier League. Whether you like them or not, it's impossible to disagree with the fact that Bournemouth saw one of the greatest rises in football history in the 2010s. However, after being relegated from the top tier in 2020, it seemed like the Cherries were destined to become an infamous yo-yo side, similar to the likes of Norwich and Fulham. However, just 3 years later, and I'm quite confident in my opinion that they could very well become the next Brighton, Leicester or Southampton, and a lot of it comes down to one man, Andoni Iraola. This is the story of a side ready to battle with the big boys. On the 30th of August 2022, Scott Parker was sacked by Bournemouth just 4 games into the Premier League season. The Cherries had lost 3 of their opening 4 games, the final of which being a record equalling 9-0 defeat at Anfield, leaving them just 1 point off the relegation zone with a shocking goal difference of -14. That being said though, the table perhaps didn't tell the full story, as said defeats had come against Man City, Arsenal and Liverpool, arguably the 3 best teams in the country, and the bigger reason for Parker's sacking would actually be his post-match comments following the Liverpool loss. Having spent just over £25 million in the summer, Parker described Bournemouth as ill-equipped for the level, comments that would cause unrest behind the scenes, leading to the manager's demise. Replacing him would be Gary O'Neill, initially as caretaker manager, where after going unbeaten in his opening 6 games, the side fell drastically, dropping down to the foot of the table after a second loss to Arsenal. But despite the odds being against the side, O'Neill's Bournemouth would go on to win 6 from the next 9 games, keeping them up relatively comfortably in 15th, an achievement however which was not deemed good enough for O'Neill to keep his job, being sacked by the Cherries on the 19th of June. This decision shocked the football world, with the side receiving plenty of backlash. However, nonetheless, said decision had been made, and later that day Andoni Iraola was announced as the side's new manager. The Spaniard is a relatively unknown entity in England, however amongst many football nerds online, the feeling is that he's got the quality to help the Cherries grow massively. However, before I get onto any tactics, let me first cover exactly who Andoni Iraola actually is. Iraola was born and raised in the Spanish Basque Country, a region in the Western Pyrenees known for its unique culture, not only just in everyday life, but also in sports, where no team are more famous than Athletic Bilbao. A right-back for most of his career, Iraola most notably played under Ernesto Valverde and Marcelo Bielsa before leaving Bilbao in 2015, where he would then play under Patrick Vieira at New York City, who would mould him into a midfielder. Iraola has publicly spoken of his admiration for each of these managers, and it's clear to see how they've influenced him when we look at his play style. However, before we can do that, let me first cover how Bournemouth looked last campaign. Under Parker, Bournemouth lined up in a 5-4-1 low block, although that might have been affected by their tough start, as there were clear signs that Parker would have utilised the mid-block in other games. When progressing the ball out from the back, Bournemouth would often pass it along the backline before waiting for the right time to hit a channel ball to either the striker or winger, who if successful would attempt to trigger a counter-attack from the knock-on. A lack of quality in the final third though, mixed with a tendency to commit too many players forward, meant that sides could hit them on the break, working with players in between the lines, a problem that only got worse as games went on and the Cherries became more desperate, with their defensive shape looking more like a Picasso painting than a thought out structure. However, when O'Neill took over, his first course of action was to set Bournemouth up in a 4-4-2 shape, initially utilising a somewhat similar long ball build up. However, with an extra man up top, it helped to give them a little more success. Importantly though, the biggest shift in Bournemouth's trajectory last season was actually in the January transfer window, in which the Cherries saw big additions to the team. A month earlier in December, the club were bought by American businessman Bill Foley, who would go on to buy French side Lorient the next month, where just a few days later, Lorient star winger Dango Ouattara would make the switch to the English South Coast, with Matthias Vigna and Hamed Traoré being other notable additions. Following the improvement in the wide areas, the link-up ability of both Billing and Solanke was used to further their counter-attacks, causing big issues for various teams. You'd often see the ball progressed via a knockdown to Billing, who'd play it in behind for a winger playing off the defender, before Solanke's movement in the box created space for a cutback and often a goal. And of course, it would also be irresponsible to not mention the Cherries' set-piece ability, with the team having the 5th highest ratio of their expected goals coming from set pieces. And now, with all that being said, what can we expect tactically and just overall from Bournemouth this season? Firstly, the club have done some impressive business, with Justin Kluivert and Milos Kerkez coming in on permanent deals, as well as Ian Radu on loan and Romain Favre, who was signed and loaned straight back to Lorient for a season. In terms of departures, the most notable one has to be of Jefferson Lerma, meaning there should be a pretty notable shift shift in midfield at the Vitality Stadium next season, something I'll get onto later. Taking a look at the tactics we should expect, let me first cover Andoni Iraola's Rayo Vallecano side of last season and how they set up on the pitch. Starting out in a 4-2-3-1, Rayo would shift into a 4-4-2 mid-block out of possession. However, a high press was also often utilised, with midfielders jumping up to push the side higher. The initial press from the two strikers was zonal, with the aim to force the ball out wide, which would then act as a trigger for a man-to-man press, suffocating the opponent, shown in the statistics as Rayo had the second most high turnovers and third best PPDA in the league last campaign. In possession, Rayo would set up in a 4-2-3-1, where it's important to note that Andoni Iraola practices positional play, a footballing philosophy based on players always maintaining set positions or zone on the pitch in order to create space to attack. The wingers stay high and wide, with the striker maintaining a high and central position in order to pin and stretch defenders. However, unlike someone like Pep Guardiola, the positioning of the midfield three is less set in stone. Sometimes when building up from the back there'll be a clear double pivot, however at other times one midfielder would act more as a sole pivot with the other one pushing up, combined with a number 10 who had a lot more positional freedom. These movements allowed Rayo to create triangles in wide areas to build up from, either giving them an overload in said wide areas or freeing up space in the middle so that when the ball is played in behind, the defender will either have to choose between staying with the number 9 or covering the space that can be attacked by an arriving player from a cutback, a situation which should be familiar to the Bournemouth players. And so with all that being said, what should we expect the Cherries to look like this season, and what does Iraola have to do in order to get them to that level? The first thing that needs to be mentioned is pressing. As compared to his Rayo Vallecano team of last season, which were one of the best pressing sides in all of Europe, Bournemouth were one of the worst, seeing 100 less high turnovers in the league than Iraola's former side. As well as this, in Iraola's press specifically, the wingers have a very important role, as not only do they trigger the shift into a man-to-man press when the ball is on their side, but also when they're the far side winger, they must be able to cover large distances to keep them compact, whilst also preventing a switch in play and progression down the wing. This is specifically important as one of the only weaknesses of Iraola's Rayo side was defending counter-attacks, and in a division where each side is much better in transitions than they are in Spain, this could be a make or break area for the Spaniard. That being said though, there are also many positives for him to look at as well. In pre-season, the Cherries have lined up in Iraola's standard 4-2-3-1, and it's fair to say that pressing has certainly improved from last campaign. And given what we know about Bournemouth and Iraola, I'd expect the Cherries to line up like this next season, utilising Solanke's technical and physical qualities to create space for either wingers to run into, or from a run from deep from Philip Billing, who I'd expect to replace Jefferson Lerma. As well as this, Iraola's Vallecano won a high number of throw-ins and corners, and with set pieces being an area Bournemouth performed well in last season, the Spaniard could use him as a get-out-of-jail free card in certain games whilst he continues to build this side up. And so with all that being said, I can confidently say that I'm very excited to see how Bournemouth get on next season, and specifically whether Iraola can go on to prove himself in the world's toughest division, or if he'll instead join the long list of managers and players who simply weren't ready for the challenge. And in a world where football is becoming more and more focused on money, it's a story of little teams beating the odds that keep us all excited, and I wouldn't bet against Bournemouth becoming the next dark horse that everyone finds themselves rooting for.